So welcome back to the Wingspan Podcast, episode 43. I'm Doug Bearak, joined by my co-host Chris Mahala Nets Daily and our special guest. He's the Director of Land Use for Brooklyn.
We welcome Richard Bearak to the podcast. Thank you for taking some time every night to join Doug and I. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
Pleasure.
Of course.
He looks quite familiar.
It's a way to get to spend some time with my son.
There we go.
For better or for worse. So can you talk about your journey to where you are today? What college did you go to or colleges? And what was your relevant position or internship? And when did you realize this career is for you, since you've been at it for quite some time?
Quite some time. So when I was young, probably instead of paying full attention in class, I used to draw maps in the back of my book and landscapes and, roads, bridges, whatever, because growing up in New York City, island. So I think there was some interest in that. And plus where I grew up was like a garden apartment development that was like a super block. So you had like the nooks and crannies that you'd go play in. And I think that eventually had some connection as I started going along with my education. In high school, I started taking some architectural classes and pursued a degree, except I graduated at the wrong time, didn't do enough checking in with college placement folk at school. So the school I applied to for architecture, City College, they didn't take students who graduated high school in January. So I was at my fallback school, which was not quite an architectural school, two-year community college called Borough, and I was in a design drafting program. And when I checked in with City College, they basically told me that we're not really going to take your design drafting credits. Switch over, general ed, make sure you get a B average, and the transfer process within City University takes like a year. So it would have been like a year and a half of liberal arts and then fingers crossed. In that context, one of my teachers mentioned architectural school in Long Island, New York Tech, which was not open that many years, less than a decade as an architectural school, wasn't even accredited yet. And they had a relationship with the Queensborough Community College, which is where I went. And so I applied to New York Tech when I finished my associate's degree. And in architectural school, we were in Old Westbury, Long Island, very charming area where in the fields beyond there were people playing polo. And this was kind of neat for a kid growing up in Eastern Queens to see a very different world. And in architecture school, started getting exposed to city planning classes, and I realized that was more where my passion lied. And the head of Hunter College, Peter Salins, he came out to do a guest lecture, and listening to him, it like really clicked. So the other thing about going to a two-year college, when I transferred, I was out of sequence. So I was taking like freshman classes, junior classes. So my path for a 5-year architectural degree was complex. So I at first graduated with a 4-year degree in architectural technology, started taking classes towards the 5-year degree, but then I got into Hunter for a master's in urban planning. I played that out. And after getting that, I did continue on and went back to New York Tech to upgrade my degree to an architectural degree with the idea of getting a license, which eventually I did get. But I really wanted to be in urban planning. And my internship happened to be with Bronx City Planning Office. And I was there, I guess, about a year and a half or so. And so it gave me some exposure to municipal employment. But why I went to an end-year party, because the government at the time, jobs were not plenty. Economy wasn't great in the early 1980s. I literally left the end-of-year party to go play softball. I grew up in Eastern Queens. So I had my car in Manhattan. And as I'm leaving, I just talked to the guy in the elevator, talk about how slow the elevator was. And he was like, come to my firm next day for an interview. So I drove to Connecticut, Stamford, Connecticut, and they like basically hired me right then and there. And that started my career in planning. And a couple of years in Stamford, then got a job in Queens City Planning with some of the contacts I had with Bronx City Planning. Worked there for 3.5 years, and then I went to the city's housing agency, where I was like worked in the unit, more of an in-house consultant for affordable housing development. And I've been with Brooklyn Borough President's office since December '93. And I'm on my third borough president, starting with Howard Golden, then the Marty Markowitz, which ties into Barclay's years. And now I work for Eric Adams. And so I've been the land use director for about 12, 13 years now.
That's quite impressive.
You finally get to know it.
I know, right? I don't know anything about what you do. So when did you realize this career is for you? And then Chris will take over.
So I think when I was in planning school, seeing the difference of what I got exposed to and what I had experienced in architectural school, to realize that I had more of a passion this direction. And like I came in more of a physical planner, and a lot of the planning students were actually not with architectural backgrounds, especially at Hunter, had a wide array of undergrad classes there. And I think at Hunter also getting exposed to a person who actually started Hunter College as an advocacy planner, Paul Moses, who one of the statements he made when I got to see him as a guest lecturer was basically finding the edge, that if you can go towards the edge but not go past it, you had a greater chance of creating change. And so my physical planning also evolved more into a passion towards community advocacy. And so not being like a rabble rouser where, you know, you have a great moment where, you know, rah-rah charge of what anti-whatever, but it's more about accomplishments. And I've had some pretty decent accomplishments, whether it's directly or behind the scenes through my career.
That's pretty cool. And then as many of the fellow listeners and viewers know, I'm very big on mentors, especially asking questions to all of our guests. So you talk about Peter, who you listened to in the lecture, and then as well as what you just said as well. But who has been some of your mentors along the way? Some people that you credit a lot of your success to.
So, you know, in some ways, some of the books that I was exposed to in planning school, in a way, even though it wasn't a direct moment with a person, but an influence, right? So now I'm blanking on a name, embarrassed. But some of these authors, Kevin Lynch, Image of a City, and like his idea of on a cocktail napkin, literally understanding how a city would have different parts, focus points, nodes, you know. And then another fellow I got exposed to in planning school was the head of the urban design school at City College, where I was allowed to take some transfer courses, Jonathan Barnett. Also, I felt a level of influence from the exposure of the classes I had with him. And then professionally, when I worked as an intern in the Bronx, there's a fellow named Ralph Zinn, who became a large part of my career, because when I left city planning to go work in the private sector, I was designing subdivisions and planned development for 2 years. He helped bring me back to city planning when he transferred to Queens, and there was an opening in Queens, and became a very special job for me. In fact, my time working in Queens, I rezoned the whole neighborhood, mostly downzone, but created some development opportunities. So that was the neighborhood of Elmhurst and Corona. And basically, when I was there, I got involved with a professor from, and I'm going a little tangent, from Queens College, urban anthropology professor, who was writing a 10-year study of the neighborhood of Elmhurst and Corona because of the amazing racial, ethnic diversity of that community, between Hispanics of many different countries and a lot of different parts of Chinese population, old time Italian sections and some other Western European sections. It's a very diverse neighborhood. And so there's a book called The Future of Us All that I became embedded into the book. I'm like listing 40 pages describing my young career. I was called the Ed Koch renegade in that book, which probably was true. Ed Koch, mayor of New York City. Technically, I was working for him as a city planner. But then after that, I followed Ralph's into HPD where he was working, and it was a mixed feeling leaving and following. It was like a chance for more money, little different exposure, but I was giving up finishing the projects that I had at Queen City Planning. And then I moved on to the Borough President's office. So the person that I work closely with, my immediate supervisor, and ending up becoming friends, John Bengyat. So I have a certain affinity towards my time under John because I really was with him probably 14 years as a professional, then obviously more years afterwards where he was still a mentor in his retirement years.
That's cool. That's cool. And then I have a two-part follow-up with you on that, so kind of giving you the opportunity to serve maybe as a possible mentor for any of our listener or viewers out there that are thinking about getting into the field that you are in. So my two-part for you is, first, what was the best advice you've received? And the second part of that is, what advice would you give to someone that's possibly listening to this that's looking to get into the field like you are in right now?
So when I mentioned Paul Moses earlier, that idea of finding the edge, like when you're looking to effectuate change, you're working in a situation where there's so many different factors to play with. And so you have to be realistic about things. And so if you're pushing too hard, you're holding out for too much, you're not going to get that change. So you may feel great in the moment of activism, but you didn't deliver anything. So I think having that mindset of achieving a level of change became important messaging in my life. I didn't mention when I worked in Connecticut, a fellow named Rick Redness was the head of the firm, but he also was a Hunter graduate, right? So, because that's how I met him. But the idea of when doing these, in this case, large scale subdivisions, the idea of having the client understand you're not totally imposing on the community, you're trying to work with the community. So like, where can you help solve community problems in the nature of the development you're doing? Spend a little bit more to try to be respectful of, I'll call it the host community, the surrounding neighbors to projects.
That's cool. And then before we dive into your ABA, your experiences growing up watching the ABA and those Nets moments, can you talk a little bit about your experience with the Nets opening up their training center?
So basically, in order to get the training facility opened in a timely manner, and for the Nets was very important from what I could take in from that there really was a sense of deadline, and there was a lot of critical moments along the way, making sure that the documentation that the agencies needed was done in a timely manner. So whether it was bringing the fact that there was more to look at to the attention within typically the buildings department where I'd be coordinating, but also was helping the applicant team understand what their deficiency were. So that relationship I have with the buildings department and the building commissioners in Brooklyn that have been there really was helpful, because they were great in terms of their end trying to, in government, government was really trying to get it done, but the people on the Nets team, right, the professionally hired, had to have everything lined up themselves. So, if they thought they had it right, but they quite with off a little bit, the idea was how we all work together to get this looked at in a timely manner. And when there were flaws, get them addressed promptly.
That's cool. That's cool. And now let's dive into some ABA Nets. So first, When was the first memory that you have of watching the Nets?
So back then there was no TV of the Nets.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So watching them meant if you saw a picture in the local paper, Long Island Press was the paper I dealt with back in the day. In fact, I delivered it for several years. So became aware of the Nets, and there was a playoff game at the facility they had in Franklin Square. Right, so this was their third home because first Jersey Americans, and then they had a brief stint in Comac, Long Island, which was also the home of the Long Island Ducks, Eastern Hockey League team. So the arena they had in Franklin Square was modest size arena, and I got to go to the game there, and I remember the score to a T. In fact, electronically I verified things last year. They were playing the Kentucky Colonels in the playoffs, and my stepfather took me, and probably my brother, I'm not sure who else went with us, to go to the game. And Nets lost 128-101, and some of the key moments, because again, if you think about that year, the game, this is pre-Rick Barry. So this is probably the 69-70 season. So this would be like April 70, my first game. Chance, because it was more of a youth-oriented fan base, or at least filling up the stands. And the arena, the Garden only held 5,000 people, basically. And so the chants were when the Kentucky Colonels had the ball was there was a TV show called Stop the Colonel. I'm not going to sing it here, but that was basically the chant when Kentucky with Louis Dampier, Derek Carrier, they were the backcourt. So, and then when the Nets had the ball, the chant was, "Don't be a litter bug, put it in the basket," and that would go out through the whole game. So it's kind of like a fun environment for, I was 12 at the time going to the game. And so that was my first exposure to the Nets. Yeah, and the team had Sonny Dove and Laverne Tart. Laverne Tart was probably the star. Sonny Dove was the local LIU guy. So, that was the initial exposure.
That's cool. And then who were some of your players growing up? And on top of that, what were some of your favorite memories like you were talking about a little earlier?
Yeah. So the first game in the Rick Barry era was playoffs. And because Rick Barry's a star, kids gravitate to stars. So, Barry's a big deal for me at the time. And we go to see them in the playoffs at Hofstra because the Island Garden already had a circus book. So the Nets went from a big 5,000 seat arena down to a 4,000 seat Hofstra gym. And I remember it was a snowstorm in early April. And my grandfather had a heart condition, drives myself and my brother to the game. And because of that, he stays in the car. He doesn't go out in the snow. But, kids forgetting about family health. And we're sitting behind a basket. And I don't remember the score of the game, but they were playing the Virginia Squires. I'm not sure. I think Dr. J was on that team, but Ray Scott was an NBAer who was playing for the Squires, and I remember that a bit. And when the players had to walk out, they had to walk out to the locker rooms near where we were sitting. So, I remember getting Rick Barry's sweat in my hand. That was kind of like,
oh, okay, I got you.
I've never gonna watch so I don't remember the game so much, but I always remember that somehow I was able to touch Rick Barry. So that was cool from that year. And then my dominant memories are really when they moved to the Nassau Coliseum. So next time I go to a game is playoffs, and it's Rick Barry's last moments with the Nets. And I don't think we realized at the time that, can't remember if it was known for certain that he was going to go back to the NBA because of the lawsuit, the way it played out with his contract with the Warriors. And so we were at the playoff game. The Nets lost. I don't remember the game per se, but I remember being in the Nassau Coliseum. It was kind of neat. It's only my second time in arena because I've been Madison Square Garden once. And after the game, we figured out where the players lived. So we waited outside and, got a bunch of autographs. And that's when I met my iconic player for me was kind of like a seventh or eighth man at the time, Johnny Baum, and who was a forward from Temple, who initially, I believe, was with the Chicago Bulls, probably hardly got any playing time and ended up on the Nets. And so I guess for whatever little extra time he gave me outside, the arena, photos, whatever, he became my guy. And as he would call me, probably never knew my name, call me my main man. That's how we would sign to my main man. Yeah. So now I start going to the games regularly, and I'm not driving yet because I'm not old enough. And to get to the Nassau Coliseum was for me either 3 buses or a mile walk to the train with another 2-mile walk from Hempstead Station to the arena, unless I bucked up to take the bus. Kids, not much income, right? Paper out. And so go to the games, and if we waited for autographs, we missed the last bus to Hempstead. And I did that a lot. So how I got home was interesting some nights. Definitely, with school the next day, it was definitely a project. But I probably went to 17, 18 games that year. Now we're without Rick Barry. Star power became George Carter, who I believe we picked up from Carolina. But it was like an era where I remember there wasn't a shot George wasn't willing to take. I used to call him Chuck Carter. I mean, he's a good player, right? But the ball went up. And that year we played the Carolina Cougars in the playoff series. And I can't remember injuries, whatever it was, but Johnny Baum got a lot of playing time and a couple of starts. And he, scored more than 20 on a couple of occasions. And he had a really great playoff series, but we lost 4 out of 5 in that series. But there are other, they had a bunch of St. John's guys, because I think the idea was local colleges, you might get added fan base. So that was the beginning of the Billy Paultz era. Another fella, Joe Dupree, who quickly went from a starter to the guy you put in the last 2 minutes of the half because you were trying to give fouls out. So you literally had a guy on the roster just to give fouls. So I don't think he wanted to be known for that, but that's kind of how it evolved. But then the next season became Dr. J, and and Larry Keenan, so it changed everything really. Eventually Brian Taylor gets drafted to add to the core of the team, and it's a pretty exciting team. Melchione, John Roche had his thing, although I used to get on him outside for he was also another one I felt like when he got the ball in his hands, it was like a shot or a drive to the hoops. So I was probably I don't know what word you want to put on the air, but I was probably
A pain.
an annoying youth to Johnny Roche after the games.
So yeah, you were kind of talking about all that kind of like star power, that kind of building. So what was it like to attend a championship game? Can you bring us back to that before we talk a little bit more current now?
So the first championship, I don't know that I went to any of the games in the 70s, but the last one I was at. And that year, now I'm driving, but I'm not going to the games as much, and they changed the roster a little bit. Like they set off Larry Keenan, Billy Paultz went to San Antonio, Swen Nader becomes part of the team, Rich Jones, and I knew a lot of the ABA guys, right? I knew all the teams back then. So like all the players, I was excited to have Rich Jones. There were like 4 Jones in the league at that time. So it's a bit of a different kind of team, but anyhow, because of the nature of it, I was able to score second row seats almost by the Nets basket. I'm sorry, not basket, bench. And, to be there with the Denver victory, that was pretty cool to be there when, it's come from behind and close out the series, because, it wasn't a guarantee, right, that was going to be, wasn't game 7. So it was a kind of cool moment to be there, not knowing it was going to be their final moment in Long Island.
So that's cool. And then let's move into the New Jersey days, right? So how involved were you in the New Jersey days, and kind of what's like your major takeaway from those days?
So first off, it was upsetting for me, right, that they're gone, right? Like I was very big ABA. You know, we lost 6 teams to the buyout, right? So 4 teams survive. Players move, so you know you lose Dr. J and several other players, you know, because of NBA rights. And at this time, you know, there's no technology. Where is Piscataway? You know, so the idea of Eastern Queens kids driving a little bit now, you know, so couldn't even figure out where to go if we wanted to go to a net game. And so it kind of pushed things back a little bit. But then when it got to the Meadowlands, again, still the idea of driving the tunnels, the bridges, whatever traffic dynamics, the idea of going to the Meadowlands never became an appealing thing. So, you know, some radio following, some TV following, guys that meant a bit to me, Buck Williams for sure. You know, it's sad that at the end, I guess, to give him a playoff chance when he went to Portland. You know, I mean, Super John was a holdover from the ABA, obviously. So, but again, you know, you're not able to be as connected to the team. Plus, as you get older, other things happen in life that just make it harder to follow. But certainly, yeah, certainly guys like, you know, Drazen, you know, the phenomenon of Drazen was something, right? You know, and some of the guys that played in that era, and, you know, Darryl Dawkins, you know, Keith Van Horn, Kenny Anderson, right? So, you know, definitely a slew of players, right, that had success. You know, occasionally the team had success, but then it didn't linger. Whatever happened, you know, you get 2-3 years in a row, then you get another bunch of years, they just totally drop out. Like the Willis Reed GM years, like probably had so many bad picks. You know, I don't know what was going on with the scouting there, that just, you know, not very lucky. Keith Van Horn is another player, you know, like to see, right? And then obviously when the kid era comes, and by then a lot more access to TV, you know, better cable packages, being in Doug's room when he's little, because be banned from the TV upstairs, so I needed to watch games somewhere. Because I guess I was the only elder in the household who was into the Nets. But, you know, the team with Kerry Kittles and Kenyon Martin, you know, Richard Jefferson, you know, it's great that he's back with the team in this capacity. But then when, you know, things change, new ownership comes, some contract dumps like with Kenyon, injuries with Kerry. And so when Vince comes, and I can't say I paid a lot of attention to Vince in Toronto, but quickly, especially with Jason Kidd's injury, and Vince willed the team to the playoffs. And that stretch they went at the end, I think they were 15-4 just to make it to the playoffs in the end, was such a great run to get there. So, you know, that was just the phenomenon of Vince, right? Probably the only thing I hated of Vince was the last shot. Okay, it's going to be Vince. Vince is doing one of those ISO dribbles about 40 feet from the key. His hand's like really low to the floor with the dribble, like instead of a big bounce. I don't know if that was meant to keep the defender from swiping at him. But like every once in a while, there'd be a flub and he wouldn't get off a good shot. But, you know, then certainly had enough great moments in the end too. But yeah, I wish the end wasn't so ISO Vince on those closeouts. You know, it could have been more creative, driving, working with Richard, you know, to get a shot off. And then, you know, the Brooklyn era, right? And so they come in, and because of where I work, some of the events, like obviously they already got Darren Williams, I felt a little sad in that trade because the forward we drafted barely had a chance to be in Brooklyn as a rookie, and Derek Favors, right, was part of that. But so now we're in Brooklyn, and then we pick up Joe. And again, my focus on basketball had been in Nets, not really watching other teams. And they did an event outside my building at Borough Hall, so I got to see up close Joe and Darren, and like the theme was Brooklyn's backcourt. Selling this phenomenal backcourt as what was going to do it for in the NBA, and you really got to appreciate Joe as a player. Quiet in a way, but really on target. And I would love for Joe to be given at least a 10-day contract to join this team. I keep telling that to Doug, so he can be with the team for a nice little playoff run, like that first playoff run when they played Chicago, and they had the lead and they let it go at the end. That was tough because I had a work meeting that night, and so I purposely had my radio. And instead of going home on the subway, I take the bus to stay above ground, even though it's much longer. And I'm listening to them fall apart at the end of the game. That was a tough finish.
Yeah, no, definitely. So what were some of your favorite memories between then to before we talk about now? Like you mentioned Joe, you mentioned D-Will, you mentioned, on basically your porch of where you work, you got to see the roots of this Brooklyn era kind of start to grow.
Well, the big difference in games back then was the 3-point shot. The ABA game was such a wide open game. And there was a guy we picked up, I think he came from Kentucky Colonels or Carolina, Wendell Ladner, who unfortunately, when we had the first ring, he was on a plane flight that crashed coming into Kennedy. I had a softball game that night. The other team didn't show up. Turns out they were stuck in traffic due to the crash. But guys like Wendell taking that long shot and really starting to appreciate the 3-ball, because certain guys in the ABA, it still wasn't a major weapon, but an occasional weapon, having guys just be that long haul shot. And Wendell just was great. I can't remember what his percentage was, but it seemed like he shot it really well back then. And obviously to see how it's transformed the game today, the Doctor, tremendous dunks that he did, right? His ability to get to the basket from the top of the key, even with like one step and then jamming it. It was pretty exciting what he could do with the ball. Not sure. Again, the Jersey years was more radio and TV, so it's not quite the same. I went to 2 games in Jersey. I remember one through work because it was something with Virginia Slims, so I fell into a freebie. We're sitting behind the basket and playing Atlanta, I believe, and Collins, right? Twin hits his 3-ball. I'm pretty sure you can look that up, the verified Atlanta game, that he hit a 3-ball. Like that was like the fact that, he even shot a long ball was pretty amazing. Don't remember the outcome of that game. The only other game I went to was for a bachelor party for Doug's uncle. And the only reason we were there was because they were playing the Knicks, and they were all Knicks fans. I was the one Net fan in the group. But, you get a whole group of people. Unfortunately, Madison Square Garden sells out, right? Hard to get tickets. The Meadowlands, the Nets had too many nights where they were half full. So it was easy to pull off to do this. So that was my other game. I don't remember the winner of that game, but I just remember, being at the game. And the timing of that game goes back to the year Doug was born, or actually the year after. So that, so it was a 93 game that they played the Knicks at the Meadowlands. So probably one of.
Speaking of me, that's a good tie-in because I'm sure some of your favorite memories thus far have been going to games with me. My delayed fandom for the Nets, the sports team. Like you said, you watched in my room because best available TV, second to your own bedroom. So what was it like to, you grew up in a household where you were the only person in sports, and all of a sudden the Nets moved to Brooklyn, and someone in your life, who's always been around, I'm not fishing for compliments here. At least I don't think I am. Maybe a little bit. But like, what was that like? To have someone else to bond with, to go to something that you really were passionate with, and kind of to see that kind of projected to someone in your life in a similar way, a different part of their life.
I
If you can
appreciate.
sum that up.
Yeah, I think it creates bonding, whether you want to call it a friendship bonding, parent-son bonding, combination of all that. So do I live my life a little through you? It's kind of neat, right? To see how you've evolved to become first, just wanting to come down from school in Hartford when you had breaks to go see games, even see preseason games, just because, the way you got into the team. And then when you were back home and, we started going to a few games here and there. And then you made your connections with with Bobby and the Brooklyn Brigade. And I went to obviously a couple of Brigade games with you, and seeing the excitement with that, and seeing more of, I'll say, European soccer kind of fandom, and bringing that to I don't know how many other NBA cities are like that, but the idea of having chants that would hardly shut up during a game. When I used to go to the Coliseums, I'd be yelling, "Put in Baum," and the people, the upper middle class fans, especially when I snuck down to the lower level, they were like, kind of get out of here. The idea of sharing heavily at games, right? I was hoarse from going to my net games in ABA, right? So to see a group of guys that were passionate in their cheering. And then that evolved to where the Nets took it over in the block, last couple of seasons. Great fan experience.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's unfortunate with the pandemic that we can't really live that, even though they're opening the doors tomorrow night for the first time for about 300 fans. Not really sure what kind of fans there'll be, so if the choir loud, but it's nice, as you said, bonding, and to see, kind of talking about your fandom, because you were literally a fanatic the way you traveled to games on the island. So to see that kind of paralleled many years later is quite fascinating, I'd like to say, even though I'm talking about myself in such a pleasant way. But
well, look, I didn't go see the team in Indianapolis like you did. I didn't see the team in Philadelphia. I think you've done that, twice?
2 or 3 times, yeah.
Yeah. So, but yes, to spend 2 hours traveling each direction, hour and a half each direction back then to see a game that takes a little over 2 hours, 2.5 hours, that was a lot for youth back then. So yeah, and now to be able to walk to games, kind of nice.
True.
That's good. And then I guess, well, this is a no-brainer really for a lot of people, but I have like a 2-part for you. So one, do you think the Nets are trending in the right direction? Obviously, as all of us saw, they have soon to be 3 All-Stars on one team that's going to be playing in the All-Star game from this Nets team. So what's your overall thoughts on the Nets and how they're doing so far?
I grew up in a way with this young net generation of Brooklyn players, right? Even when they had rough records, right? And, so some of the guys, you wanted to root for them to develop to become the stars. So like this connection was, well, were you really using all these guys just to become trade material as you created your Brooklyn culture? Because except for Joe, nobody's left, right? The team that, we grew up rooting for, that was 26 and whatever, 20, 1 and whatever, they're all gone. But it was fun watching them compete, even though the talent level wasn't quite there, right? So like, I feel a sense of sadness that those guys, were they used? They're not it, right? Although when the Karras trade happened, I was bummed out in a way. I don't follow the league, right? So I didn't get to see Harden play a lot. If the playoffs are happening, Nets aren't in, I'm not watching them. And so basically here you get to really get into these guys, and Karras with his journey with the injury overcoming, and especially the initial injury before he had the second injury, That was also devastating, right? And then Jared, right? His energy, you feel sad. Like when you see the rumors going on for 6 months that Jared could be trade bait, and the
I mean, how do you
whole
think
thing
Brooke
about,
Lopez fell? Nine seasons he survived. He had cat lives before he was
yeah.
traded.
So like, Jared, right? This whole thing about him then not starting later last season, and it was kind of tough when I felt he's the guy. Yeah, sure. You're not ready to muscle, right? Get pushed back by some players. But so at first it takes your heart out of it a little bit, right? Even though you're getting this star. But then when you think about it, like we saved Karras's life, maybe because of the trade. And, so that starts having you let go a little bit. And because of what's going on with Drummond and Cleveland, how quickly Jared's immersed into a situation, he's really becoming something special. And maybe he'll find his way back to Brooklyn one day. But so watching Harden early on, like, first of all, the way he was going about fitting in. He wasn't trying to become the 30-shot guy immediately. He was looking to move the ball around. Yeah, maybe some of his passes were a little lazy, and he still, I think, has a tendency to telegraph a pass a little too much with turnovers. But he looks like a real selfless player. So whether his teammates in Houston felt that or not, who knows? But he's coming across selfless. And I love that about Harden. When the whole Kyrie thing last year, so first of all, the loss, to get him, right, we had to let a player go, right? So in the KD trade, D'Angelo goes. Well, I developed an affinity for D'Angelo. And, so I felt bad not having D'Angelo be part of this. And Kyrie, he goes off offensively at times, and sometimes you wonder, is he shooting too much? Like the other night, he was 2 for 11 from 3, and late in the game when we had the chance to put the game away, I'm on radio now, so was the 3 shots, I think he took 2 of them on his last 2 shot attempts towards the end, was that the best way to close out a game instead of getting the ball closer to the hoop, maybe trying to draw a foul? Because he's a really good driver, but he doesn't always play the game to get the contact and get the free throws. So I'm still not there on his game yet. Kevin, I find amazing. Again, Western Conference guy, not going to see him a whole lot during his prior years, but of course, how can you not be aware of him? What he did with OKC before he went over, even though he had heartbreak loss to the Warriors, right, when they were up 3-1. But, I feel really good about Durant, feel really good about Harden. There are times with Kyrie, we'll see, obviously the bench is a little thinner right now. And Nash is mixing it up to figure out the right blending. It's interesting how some guys hardly got playing time, and Brown worked his way in really well, right? And I was kind of rooting based on the bubble last year, and I really loved how he played in the bubble with everybody dropping out. But like Tyler Johnson, I picked up an affinity for him with the bubble. It's kind of interesting how we signed him to that contract. He got matched, and he was just a name from that moment, right? Didn't really know his Miami game. But I'm glad to see him start getting into the rotation and being productive. So that's a nice thing. Lawabu, it's some games he's better than other games, but I like him on the team, right? Shamet, I didn't know his game as West Coast guy. But like early on, it seemed like he was getting a lot of chances, maybe because of reputation of what he was, but he wasn't locked in early on. Some games he's locked in, the other night he wasn't, right? we've gone to a very short bench because of circumstance. But I guess with 3 strong starters and guys like Jeff Green, you don't necessarily need to go deep into the bench because you got enough quality players to give a lot of guys 30 minutes. So, maybe if we're not injured, maybe we're fine with a shallow bench moving forward. So it's going to be interesting to watch the dynamic moving forward, and maybe that opens up room for Joe Johnson for 10-day at the end to give us a little more.
Well, it's funny. You listed so many names, but I think you skipped over one that you probably grew and have an affinity for that was built here and wasn't traded. Joe Harris.
Yeah, I thought I mentioned Joe before.
Maybe quickly. I don't know. I've been so fixated.
Yeah,
on you talking about.
I really like Joe Harris's game, and he has been a nice evolution from when we first got him, and he'd get a few minutes here and there, and like Bojan Bogdanovic, right? Kind of filled on him, I believe, or was it Mirza? Trying to remember the timing with Joe. And, he became the sharpshooter when they moved on, or one of them moved on. And most games he's really on. Yes, there are games, you're not always going to have that shot going. But even when a shot's not going, his cutting to the basket, his movement, he seems to have enough of a defense presence. So very happy that Joe has contributed the way he has. And, the fact that his leading the NBA again in 3 points and at such a high clutch. I mean, the idea of shooting better than 40% back in the day was amazing. So you're shooting threes at above 50 when the idea would be you'd hope to have a guy shoot twos at 50. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, well, I don't do this often, but I have to apologize. Chris let me know that you actually did mention Joe, but I'm glad you got to elaborate on him even more because everybody loves Joe. So our last question of the night, you've made it. Do you feel that the Nets can win an NBA championship this season?
So, when you look at a lot of the records this year, there's not a lot of teams that are playing dominant. Even Milwaukee, for whatever reason, not sure why their winning percentage isn't that great. So now that the Nets are starting to click, I think they're in a great position to take on for a championship because with the East, really, there's not a lot of strong clubs. There's okay teams. Boston's record's probably not what they thought it would be, right? Toronto took the dip. So getting out of the East, I think it would be an upset if they don't get out of the East. We'll see how Milwaukee plays out the year, whether they become more of the team we think they are. Or were to be. And then in the West, it really seems to be the Clippers and the Lakers. But the Lakers, I don't think, have a tremendous bench themselves, right? So, matchups, and is there a guarantee they get out of the West anyhow? San Antonio is a nice little surprise, right? What they've been doing. Portland also. And, we'll see more of the year as it progresses to see. Utah's been stunning, right? Utah's a wonderful story. And for me, Utah matters because it was an ABA city, although it's not the ABA team because this is the New Orleans team. But I think it's kind of neat, all those years with Karl Malone and Stockton, how they could get close but never could turn it on. So Utah will be a wonderful challenge. I think that would be a great series, actually, Nets and Utah.
Well,
not saying I'm winning it, but great series.
We'll see. We got a few more months to go, but thanks again for joining us, Dad. Really appreciate taking your time out of your night to talk to Chris and I. You can thank the wife for letting you on. So that's really it we got for you. So thank you.
And back in the day, it was ABA all the way.
There you go. Love it.
Especially when they play the NBA in those All-Star games.
Yeah, those are good times. Those are highlights in my viewpoint, obviously, not in real life, but. Well, you guys know the deal by now. Remember to send over any suggestions, questions, comments, or thoughts on any of our content by sending an email to wingspanpodcast@gmail.com. And do not forget to follow us on our social media accounts. But most importantly, make sure you subscribe to our podcast on your preferred listening service. And as for next time, stay classy, take care, and wear a mask.